Hello everyone and welcome to day 2 of our second Clean Sport Insight Forum. I'm delighted to welcome you today on behalf of the Clean Sport Alliance. And just by way of introduction, I just want to share with you a reminder that the Clean Sport Alliance is very much built upon the cumulative strengths and complementary portfolios of anti-doping researchers, National Anti-Doping Organisation practitioners and athletes. And very much at the heart of the Clean Sport Alliance is a purpose of trying to bridge the gap between research, policy and practice. And we're doing that really in order to try and foster high quality research that helps us to deliver better and more effective anti-doping education. We are thrilled to welcome you to the forum, although be it in a virtual space, because we believe in the power of collaboration and connection. And I think by building those networks, we have the greatest hope of trying to realise that ambition of bridging the gap. So yesterday, for those that were unable to join us, the theme of the sessions that we hosted was very much around emerging research and practice in clean sport. And through the collective conversations we hosted yesterday, we identified a number of gaps in the evidence base. We also shared and highlighted the opportunity that's now been afforded by the forthcoming international standard for education. And we really highlighted the value and importance of working with athletes, engaging them in the conversations, because they are very much part of the solution. And I think that is really highlighted in the importance of taking an athlete-centred approach to realising the vision of clean sport. And by creating a vision for clean sport, that's very much the theme of today's event. We're very much building on yesterday's conversations, and we are emphasising there the importance of bringing lots of different organisations and stakeholders together to really draw on their experience and intelligence in looking at future solutions. So today we'll again host 3 sessions. They will start with a collective conversation on our Clean Sport Plan 2030. We'll then follow with a presentation from the education team at the World Anti-Doping Agency. And they will consider very much WADA's education strategy and how we might be able to work collectively together to realise the ambition of that strategy. And finally, we'll finish on a panel event where we look at how we're going to sustain the efforts of the Clean Sport Alliance, and we'll share the approach that we'll take with the Respect P project. So if you were unable to join us yesterday, I just want to highlight very much that we shared the goal of the project and the outputs of the project in brief, but you can find more details about that at our knowledge exchange platform, cleansportalliance.org. So please go and orientate yourself around that content if you haven't done so already. With over 220 members of the sporting community joining us at the forum from all over the world, I'm really pleased already to see many of you saying hello and introducing yourselves to other delegates in the platform. We'd have loved to be together in Slovenia, which was where we were originally due to be, but obviously due to current circumstances, that wasn't possible. So as much as we can, we want you to engage in chat. We want you to interact with each other through our virtual platform. If you were not here yesterday in person in the event as well, you may not know some of the functionality of the platform. So just to say that you are able to chat through the chat function. You can ask questions of the speakers through the Q&A button, and you can also upvote your favourite questions that you'd really like us to prioritise and ask the speakers during those sessions. So please make the most of that as and when you can. We also, in the spirit of bridging the gap, we are making all of our recordings available through the Knowledge Exchange platform. So for those that have not been able to join us today due to time zone matters, we will be able to ensure people can watch back and listen to some of the conversations that we engage in today. Finally, I'd just like to thank all of the speakers who've given their time and energy to ensure that the event over today and yesterday were possible. This way of working actually probably is more anxiety-induced than a face-to-face event, and actually probably more time-consuming. But I think we have got within the community a huge number of passionate and committed people who want to make a difference. And that is one thing that I think will help us realise our vision as we move forward into the future. So a big thank you to our speakers, a big thank you to Katia and Camille for creating the platform that's allowing us to bring this event together. And thank you to you all for joining us today. It's now my great pleasure in welcoming Dr. Ian Boardley from the University of Birmingham and Eric de Wijn from the Anti-Doping Netherlands Doping Authority to join us on today's panel, where we will look at our Clean Sport Plan 2030. So let me welcome you to the panel, Eric and Ian.
Hello, everybody.
Delighted to be welcomed by Eric and Ian, and really what we want to try and do with the first session of today's event is to highlight what exactly is the Clean Sport Plan and how we've gone about developing it. So Ian, can we start with you for just a key summary on what are the key findings from the Clean Sport Plan?
Yeah, sure. Afternoon, everyone. So this was just very briefly, we engaged with practitioners and researchers working in clean sport and anti-doping, experts in the area, to try to identify some of the key areas that were needed in research, and also questions that underpin those areas. And we identified 8 research areas that were considered priorities, but some of those were higher priority than others. And what we did there was we allocated more research questions to the highest priority research areas. So the highest priority research area was, and tying in very well with something we discussed in the review session yesterday, was around the effectiveness of anti-doping interventions and education programs. So in particular, the ones that athletes are being exposed to and the ones that are being utilised at the moment, but also in terms of their long-term evaluation and developing reliable tools to assist that evaluation. And then the second main research area was developmental influences from outside of sport on young children. So a lot of the research that's been conducted today has been with adults and adolescents and not always elite athletes. And what this was identifying was trying to understand what's leading to the development of sporting and moral values in athletes, and some of the characteristics that are influencing decisions around clean sport behaviours in our adult lives, but those developmental influences younger, so earlier on in people's developmental life course. So they were the 2 key areas, the ones that are the highest priority. And obviously we've got the download on the Knowledge Exchange platform to see the full research agenda.
Thank you, Ian, for that introduction. And Eric, if we can bring you into the conversation, in terms of the 8 priority areas that have been identified, why is that important to the practitioner community?
Well, I think that it's not only important for the practitioners, but as we say constantly, we try to bridge the gap between policy, research, and practice. The Clean Sport Plan has taken a look at the opinions of all the experts in the field, and they came up with this plan. These are the priorities that we have. These are the things that we really can use in the field. So it gives us focus and direction. It helps us to put the money and the time where we want it to be, and in the end really have outcomes that we can use in practice. So it applies to all areas. We're more effective if we take this kind of approach and use this plan to see where we want to put our time and money in for the next 10 years.
Yeah, Eric, that's a really key point, isn't it? In that the process of developing the plan and the strategic priorities very much drew upon multiple stakeholder input from both the researcher and the practitioner community. And Ian, from the researcher's side of the lens, how can this be helpful to them, and what do you hope that this plan will start to achieve through its implementation?
Yeah, I think there's a few reasons why this is really important for researchers. Firstly, it gives direction to the research efforts. So I think in the past, although there might be some direction from the specific call, I think to some degree researchers have been trying to guess or second guess what specifically was wanted from funders, but also probably drawing upon their own research interests. But that doesn't necessarily always mean that what they're submitting and what they're proposing to research is directly aligning with what practitioners want. I think because we've got this connection and input from both practitioners and researchers, we're now identifying areas that have got real importance and meaning for the research community, also for practitioners. So there's much greater likelihood that our research is going to be utilised and impactful at the practitioner level. It also prevents duplication of effort. So obviously we might have 2 or 3 researchers submitting very similar bids or getting alternate funding from different routes and doing very similar work. And obviously making new contributions, although as researchers we do want to replicate findings, but we're doing that purposefully and in a strategic way, not by chance. But I think it also allows us as researchers to develop long-term programs of research and plans for research, because we can see where the research is heading and what the overall objective of area of research is. So we're not just conducting unique individual studies, but we're also, each study is part of a much bigger plan. I think the plan helps guide and direct.
Yeah, brilliant. And actually, we've just had a question in the Q&A box that I'd just like to draw upon, I think, because it follows on, Ian, from what we're talking about from a researcher perspective. What do you think are the most appropriate and feasible methods to measure effectiveness in anti-doping? So that's been posted by Daniel Westmackelman. What are the most effective and appropriate methods to measure effectiveness in anti-doping?
I think we probably need a combination of measures to evaluate effectiveness. So we need to be using some standardized psychometric measures that we can compare across studies as a result of the program. But we also need to be getting in-depth qualitative feedback and engagement at sort of individual level to get the depth of understanding how people are actually understanding and interpreting the education services. And we need to use the time tracking at the different levels.
And
Eric, any reflections from you?
Well, I think that I'm working as an educator for 11 years now, and at the start it was a lot about information provision, and it's easier to measure information, whether it's people really understand what you have said. But now we have been going to other directions as well. So we're measuring skills, we're measuring the values behind it. And I think for us as practitioners, it all starts with what do you really want to achieve? Do you have your outcomes? Have you written them down? And then based on those outcomes, you can measure the effectiveness. So it really starts, and that's why I'm really happy with the International Standard for Education. It really starts with your plan. What do you try to achieve? Have you written it down? And then it also helps the researchers to measure effectiveness based on that.
Yeah, and the ability for then one of the ethos and intentions around the Clean Sport Alliance of bridging that gap, of ensuring the researchers, practitioners, policymakers are at the start of that journey together many times in producing those questions and plans is part of that process. And I think we've talked about, then you've highlighted, both of you, the importance of taking a strategic approach through the implementation of that Clean Sport plan. But there are potential challenges and barriers to that implementation. Ian, do you want to start by maybe reflecting on what maybe some of those barriers may be and how we might start to overcome them?
Yeah, I think obviously one of the key ones, and the one that immediately comes to mind and was mentioned when we're gathering information from researchers, was the research funding, insufficient research funding. So we do need a lot more research funding if we're going to do the collaborative, high quality research that's needed. So obviously that lobby for and research funding is important. But I think the stakeholder engagement is really important as well. So one of the barriers is potential for lack of stakeholder engagement. So we need to think about how we're going to make sure we engage all stakeholders throughout the research process and not just at the end of the research process. I think developing collaborative networks, research key stakeholders from WADA, from the IEC, and having those set up in place, sure group participants get engagement from participants for the outputs that are coming from research. Show that that stakeholder engagement is there throughout the research process.
And Eric, from the point of view of the practitioners and the implementation of that, what are potentially some of the barriers that we've identified there, and how do you see us overcoming those really for that long-term plan?
I'm actually quite optimistic. The momentum is on our side. We as a profession are quite young. We try to find a common language. We try to find a real solid group of people bringing everything forward and bringing it forward faster. If we look at, for instance, WADA's social science research program, that's been updated. We have the European Commission making more and more funding available via its Erasmus Plus program. So I see a lot of enablers, and I see fewer barriers at this point. So yeah, I'm quite excited for the next 10 years and see what we can come up with.
And that excitement is really important, actually, isn't it? You know, we really want to have that element of enthusiasm and kind of purpose-led interactions and interventions moving forward. And Eric, I think that gives us a really nice point to maybe reflect on the developments as we see it around the knowledge exchange platform for the Clean Sport Alliance, and how that and its development over the next few years might help us realise that ambition then of the plan.
Yeah, thanks. The Clean Sport Alliance is something that we came up with as a group within this Erasmus Plus project. Just 5 ADOs and a bunch of researchers, and we've been working on it for the last 3 years. And now it's time for us to make it more open and let the alliance grow. Have people come in, make it also more global, because now it's quite a European group of people. And luckily, we have secured funding for the next 2 years via the RESPECT-P project. So in the upcoming 2 years, we'll be able to really make that alliance grow and get it out of our heads and into the heads of other people and see if we can share more knowledge and experiences to set up more international research projects. So it becomes a more global approach that everybody can benefit from. But please give us the next 2 years to make it more visible and clearer on how we want to do that.
That's brilliant. And actually, Eric, you mentioned there, you know, it's very much it's originated from a European space and place. But actually, even just looking at the general chat this morning or this afternoon, it's really great to see people saying hello. We've got hellos from foggy Germany, but then we go to sunny Cape Town in South Africa. We move to Dallas, Texas. You know, we then go to sunny Derby. If we look at it, we have then different places, and please feel free to kind of let us know where you're joining us from today in that chat function, because it's really nice to see just exactly where we are reaching through today's forum. But I think that's a really nice end for us to reflect on in that plan. The ambition is there to bring about collaboration, to bring about long-term thinking in order to realise the ambition of clean sport. And I think we are trying through the platform. We will continue with the newsletters that originate from the platform on a quarterly basis to engage more broadly with the community and invite suggestions and opportunities for further advancement. So that is an open call. It's very much an enabler in how we move forward together. So please let me thank Ian and Eric for their participation in our opening session today. If you've got any questions on the plan, please do get in touch with us. And I'd like to now just take the opportunity to say we will be very much welcoming Amanda Hudson and Tony Cunningham to session 2, and they will start with a presentation from their side in terms of the title being Bridging the Gap Between Research, Policy and Practice. How can we realise the benefits of clean sport education? So they will present their thoughts to you first, and then we will open up to a Q&A with Amanda and Tony following their presentation. So thank you again to Ian and Eric for kicking us off, and we'll see you very shortly for session 2.
Hi everyone, good morning, good afternoon and good evening to you all. I hope you're having a great Clean Sport Insight Forum so far. It's a fantastic event, and both myself and my colleague Tony Cunningham feel very honoured that we have been invited to share with you today some of WADA's activities. For anyone who doesn't know me, my name's Amanda Hudson and I'm the Director of Education here at WADA. And so together, Tony and I will just update you all on some of our recent activities related to all things policy, practice and research. I know we're all dealing with COVID in our own ways, and I really hope that your families and yourselves and your colleagues are safe. So this is a different way for me presenting virtually from home, as WADA is still mainly working from home. But I hope you find our update useful, and that Tony and I will be around for questions live as part of the forum a bit later in the session. So let's get started. I think the first thing to say is how much WADA is committed and invested now in education. We've always been the underdog, possibly in the anti-doping program, and we have a lot of catching up to do in terms of our stage of development. But it's really pleasing to see that education now definitely has a seat at the table, and that's shown throughout the organisation in terms of colleagues' commitments to support our work, as well as commitment from the highest level in terms of our president. And you can see in his quote here what it is that we're trying to achieve and the importance of education, not just for the current athletes, the athlete support personnel and the practitioners who are working in the system, but education has a huge role to play in setting or resetting the culture that we want to see as part of clean sport in the next generation of athletes. And so I feel this is a really exciting time for education, and events such as the Clean Sport Insight Forum go a long way to helping us on that journey. So what does that mean for WADA and its education function? Well, being new, some of you might be new in your jobs or remember when you first started. It's a great opportunity to take stock, to review, to reflect, to think about what it is that we should be trying to achieve as WADA through educational activities. And so this is our common agenda. The common agenda is shared between my team, WADA, and also the Education Committee, who are my support, who help the team who give us advice and guidance and direction. And together, this is our common agenda. We know we have some work to do to strategically position education as a fundamental component of any anti-doping program. We know we have a role to play in promoting a clean sport culture to stakeholders and to keep enhancing this message that athletes start in sport clean. We want to ensure that there is equal access to education across the world. And so our efforts are going to be focused on increasing access to education through the provision of solutions that anti-doping organisations can use, should they need to or should they wish, to support the delivery of their education programmes. And in order to ensure those solutions are fit for purpose, we obviously want to continue to raise the quality of education programmes through the policies and standards that we have in place. And I'm sure you're all aware by now that our first ever brand new international standard for education comes into effect on the 1st of January next year. Two more things that are part of our agenda. We want to play a role in improving the capability of people working in the clean sport community. Education can have a much more powerful role than just focusing on athletes and athlete support personnel. We believe education can also help support the anti-doping practitioners who are working day in, day out, developing and enhancing and improving their anti-doping programs. And so we will be focusing on how we can ensure that training opportunities and professional development opportunities are available for those working in our community. And last but by no means least, and I know this is a big focus today for the Clean Sport Insight Forum, is research, and everything that we do where possible should be informed by research that is available. And Tony will talk more on our efforts around social science research a bit later in this session. So this is where we're heading. And in order to try and ensure that we have the strategic positioning that we need, I hope you've all had the opportunity to read and digest WADA's recently published strategic plan. And hopefully you'll see in there that education features together with the other core components of an anti-doping program. And we're really pleased to see that. Particularly if you look under the strategic objectives such as LEAD, where we talk about impactful research. If you look at athlete-centered, where we have a key role to play in supporting the education and the experience of athletes in the anti-doping system. And also through some of our strategic initiatives, such as Grow Impact, where we do have a role to play, as I mentioned, in supporting anti-doping practitioners to be the best that they can be. So we've made a start on our strategic positioning of education. The other fundamental outcome of the work the management team did on the strategic plan is to really think about WADA's role in the anti-doping system. And I know previously WADA maybe has tried to be all things to all people, and with the resources we have, with the expectations that stakeholders have, it's not possible for us to continue in that vein. And so we're a bit clearer now on our role. And our role is to regulate the anti-doping system. In our specific case, that would be looking at regulating and monitoring compliance against the international standard for education. And we also have an enabling role. So that means from an education perspective, our job is not to educate athletes or athlete support personnel, but our role is to help you. It's to help the anti-doping organizations deliver and develop fantastic education programs for your target audiences. And that's the delivery part. And that's the vital role that you all play day to day in the work that you do. And so what does that mean for the education department at WADA? What are our core functions? Well, so far we've identified 4. We have a role to play, obviously, in education policy and standards. We have a role to lead social science research in anti-doping and the broader clean sport community. In order to enable anti-doping organizations, we have a role to play in the provision of digital education solutions that practitioners can use. And as I mentioned, we do now want to start looking at how we can better support anti-doping practitioners and enhance capability development. And so today we do want to stick to the theme of the day, which is policy, research and practice. And together with Tony, we will lead you through how our activities are also trying to ensure there is greater connection between research, policy and practice. And so now I will hand over to Tony, who leads for us on the International Standard for Education and Social Science Research. Tony, over to you.
Thank you very much for that, Amanda. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you all today. And as Amanda mentioned, I will be taking you through WADA's core functions in relation to education policy and social science research. I am aware that a number of people in the audience have probably heard me speak on these issues in recent weeks and months. But what I'd like to do is kind of address them through the lens of what we're discussing today. And this is this idea of bridging the gap between policy, research and practice, and how WADA's initiatives will look to help three key areas. The first thing you'll notice is that these three areas around policy, research and practice also nicely align to what Amanda described around WADA's roles as a regulator, an enabler, and less so now on the delivery side. But we will, of course, support initiatives that will ultimately look to help the practice and improve the experience of athletes. So I'll discuss the policy side of things and the research in terms of how it will inform and hopefully improve practice as we move forward. So in terms of the first part of the framework that we're looking at when we think about the International Standard for Education, a lot of people now are going to be thinking about the different articles within that, particularly our signatories in terms of what they need to do. But I think it's also always important to reiterate what the underpinning principles of the standard are and why we're doing and why this has come into being. And that's really the idea of that it is very much focused on athletes and supporting athletes. All athletes start in sport clean. And the idea of the education function is to support them to maintain that. So this idea that an athlete should be educated before they're tested, specifically international athletes, we would very much aspire to have them educated before they leave their country's borders, before they encounter a foreign doping control officer who doesn't speak their language. We acknowledge as well that education needs to be tailored and needs to be tailored for the person it's being delivered to. Cooperation is a key part and a key principle that is embedded within the document. And of course, as we are setting a standard and we're setting a bar, the challenge is around setting that bar at a reasonable level that it is meaningful for all stakeholders in order to improve education, but also not too high as that it can't be met for a number of stakeholders who simply don't have the resources to do it. So these principles are all very much embedded in the document itself. And when we think about all of the different roles and responsibilities that different stakeholders have, this is very much reflected in what we try to articulate. So when we think about the delivery side, again, as WADA will have less and less of a role in this side, what we've still tried to do is set a framework, focusing very much on the athlete pathway. And you can see as an athlete moves through their career, what we've tried to do is identify who should be taking the primary responsibility or primary role in delivering education at each of these stages. And that is, again, specified in the articles around roles and responsibilities within the document itself. And all the time as well, taking account that people around the athletes also need to be educated. And there is a role for all of the different organizations at each stage of the pathway for them too. So when we look at all these stakeholders, signatories, organizations, what they have to do, it really all boils down to 4 key areas. And that is, there has to be an education plan developed and recorded and shared. This plan has to be implemented. It has to be monitored, and then it has to be evaluated to demonstrate whether the objectives set out have been achieved or not. This hopefully in turn will lead to the next education plan. And really what we're trying to do is, rather than have a compliance focus, is very much have it on driving improvement in education programs. And we do recognize that a lot of people, this is very much new for a lot of people, and we have delivered and published the guidelines for the International Standard for Education. This is very much seen as an anchor document. It's quite comprehensive, and it is therefore with a recognition that not every organization or not every person tasked with delivering education will have a background in education. So this is used as a tool for them and all organizations to refer to. We will continually develop as the implementation of the standard comes into force and we start seeing emerging practice and how we can share that more effectively. So then when we're looking at how research can play a role in this, we did very much look at the research during the development of the International Standard for Education. But now what we're looking to do is to, I suppose, be a bit more proactive in what we're doing on the research side and how it can, again, drive improvement in the education experience of athletes and look at the wider anti-doping system. What we've done in 2020 is develop a social science research strategy. This is available on our website if you would like to see that in more detail. And what this has done is it's kind of allowed us to situate social science research in relation to our governance within WADA, aligning it with WADA's strategic plan, making sure that it feeds into the education committee. We have a social science review panel that then guides the direction and the implementation of the social science research strategy. As this cascades down into an operational level, we have identified levels of influence or areas that we're interested in, specifically research priorities that I will talk about shortly. And this in turn has informed our new social science research grant program. So the kind of things that we're looking to do as we move forward, the research strategy is for 4 years. We're looking to coordinate the research agenda, identify our priorities, publish them, work with a larger group of disciplines within the area, other organizations. Looking to, I suppose, the recognition that there's going to be a lot more data in the system through the monitoring and evaluation that is required in the international standard, is looking to harness that, aggregate it, and give us an insight into whether the system is working or not. Sharing what we know, there's more and more research coming into the area, so trying to translate that into something that's meaningful for practitioners is going to be a core area of what we're going to look at over the next 4 years. Leading by example, simply monitoring and evaluating the programs that we initiate and we deliver ourselves. I suppose doing what we expect of our stakeholders and we do it ourselves. Developing research capability, particularly in regions that have been traditionally underfunded by WADA. So we're looking to be more proactive in developing capacity, expertise, and capability in these regions. And of course, recognizing as well that we're not the only players in this field, so we would like to communicate and cooperate in a more aligned fashion with other international organizations in this space. So looking in terms of the collaboration and what we've done in identifying research priorities specifically, we were very much aware of the RESPECT project from the beginning, and we indeed contributed to the Delphi poll. So it was reassuring for us to see that a lot of what we fed in was also reflected in what came out the other end and reflective of what our stakeholders in terms of the practitioners and the academic experts also felt were important areas that needed to be addressed or gaps within the system. What we needed to do then was adapt what came out of that and frame it for our own system, for the anti-doping system, and to frame it in a way that reflected what we were specifically interested in. And really what we wanted to keep a focus on was the athlete and keep the athlete at the center of our focus. And what we see here are the levels of influence that then have an effect or an impact on the athlete's behavior. So keeping that focus with the athlete, we then radiate it out at the different levels or societal levels, from the athlete support personnel all the way out to the societal and cultural influences that may have an impact on the athlete. This then fed directly into the research priorities that we looked to have. So we have 2 research priorities at each of these levels. And then further down again, what we were able to do is identify research questions or indicative areas of inquiry that we were able to demonstrate what we were specifically interested in. So when we look at the athlete level, again, like what came out of the Delphi study is also aligned to what we're very much interested in, and that is the athlete experience and what has an impact on athlete behavior. The same as well for the athlete support personnel. What is their experience of the system and what is their role and influence on athletes? And as you go through each of the levels, you can see all of the questions that are there. Particularly as well, we're very much interested in the effectiveness of education programs. And that's where we kind of then take a wider lens in terms of the wider anti-doping system and what is the impact that the World Anti-Doping Program is having. And then as we go further out again, what is the impact that sport policy and sport practice can have on the athletes' attitudes and behaviors, all the way out to the cultural influences that impact them. So these are the things that we're going to be investigating and have an interest in over the next 4 years. And we'll be able to monitor, because of the framework that we put in place, we'll be able to see gaps in the system, but also translate that for our stakeholders, so that they can identify what it means for them in delivering messages to athletes. And really what it comes down to is trying to implement all of this. These are all just documents when it comes down to it, and making sure that they're aligned and making sure that these initiatives get implemented is going to be a key part of our work. Because ultimately what we're looking to do is make sure that this all translates onto the ground to make sure that the athletes are getting the right messages, that it is evidence informed, that it is within the framework of the policy. So no matter what that looks like, it's about making sure that the athletes ultimately are making informed decisions for themselves. And we will provide tools to help our stakeholders deliver this as much as we can. And Amanda's going to talk a little bit more about that now. So I'll hand back over to her and I'll be available for questions after. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. So my job now is to briefly talk you through the other 2 core functions, digital education and ADO capability and development support. And hopefully you've noticed on the left-hand side our new Adele icon. And hopefully you've heard that Adele is going to be rebuilt and that it will be launched in January next year. I know WADA hopefully communicated to stakeholders last week to let them know that a new Adele is coming and about the changes. So let me give you a snapshot of some of the things that we're trying to achieve with the new Adele platform. And I think the first thing to say is one of the reasons we've made this investment is to ensure that we can provide a better service to anti-doping organizations, supporting them both in their frontline education delivery, but also ensuring they have access to resources to help them in their day-to-day jobs. And so our new Adele platform will have a much improved user experience. It will be modern and responsive and intuitive. And we've made a conscious decision to try and foster some community and peer learning. So there will be the ability to comment and talk and ask questions on some of the places on the new Adele platform, particularly for ADO practitioners. That's where that feature will be made available so that people in the community can ask questions, and we hope to instill, as I say, this culture of peer support and peer learning. Another fundamental change is that we will be changing the way that we produce content. 2 things. One, if you've had the opportunity to read the guidelines, as Tony explained in his section, you'll see that we have put forward a generic athlete pathway model. And that means that our current content needs to be reworked, rebuilt, and adapted to better suit the level at which the athlete is participating in sport. This means some big changes. So courses such as Alpha and equally Coach True for athlete support personnel for coaches will no longer exist in the new Adele world. What we will be moving to is bite-sized content that's more relevant to the stage of development of the athlete. And whilst that's obviously more pedagogical, it also provides opportunities for athletes who may have 15 or 20 minutes to do a chunk of learning compared to being sat at a desktop or on a tablet for 2 to 3 hours. So we hope that these changes will better suit the needs of athletes. You'll see we're going to have a new mobile app, Adele by WADA, and that will also allow for learning on the go. And also importantly, for some regions of the world where internet connection or the cost of internet services is high, it does allow for some offline learning. And obviously one of our agenda principles is to try and increase access to education. So we're investing in a mobile app to try and improve and increase the access. Two things that probably for anti-doping, CISP, our code implementation support program, lives on. So all of the CISP resources will be available, and we will continue to add tools and templates to help you in your work. And one of the big challenges we face, particularly as WADA, is languages and the ability for anti-doping organizations to customize and translate resources into the language of their choice. And so I'm pleased to say that we now have a free process that stakeholders will be able to use. It will feature a machine translation to start off with, and then a human review. So it will still take time for anti-doping organizations to translate materials, but the way that we've embedded the machine learning, the machine translation, means that as you use that software more, it will actually remember some of the words that you wish to use to describe the things that in a way that makes sense to you. So as an example, in French, the direct translation would be athlète, but we actually use sportif. So once you've made that change once, the next time you add a new resource or a new course into that software, it will remember your changes. And as WADA, we are going to commit now to making sure where possible that all of our educational material is available in French, Spanish and English. So really pleased that whilst it's always a difficult job to translate materials, we will have a free and better process in place to support anti-doping organizations who want to do that. Just a quick highlight of some of the more recent resources: sport values in every classroom, values-based education toolkit for teachers to use in schools or a sports club setting. We hope that that will be available in French and Spanish early next year. Hopefully you're all aware that we, together with the ITA and the IOC, came together to produce some pre-games learning ahead of Tokyo. And I'm pleased to say that we're now working with the International Paralympic Committee to do the same for the Paralympic Games. And that should be ready early next year on the new platform. My plea to you all is, if you have your own pre-games education program, fantastic. If you don't, please get in touch with your National Olympic and Paralympic committees, and please work with them to ensure that they have access to these education programs, because collectively we should all be trying our best to ensure that athletes do not end up at the biggest event of their sporting careers uneducated. We have a new code coming, the 2021 code, and so we've developed an athlete's guide to the significant changes to the 2021 code, and that was published last week and is available again in English, French and Spanish. So if you need to communicate the significant changes to athletes, there is a resource now to do that, and we know ADOs are keen to translate that into different languages, so please get in touch with Kang-Eun in my team, and we can look to help you with that from January once our platform is launched. And lastly, at the beginning of the year, we redid our Adele for Medical Professionals, and the feedback on that course so far has been really positive. And the list on the right-hand side is things that are either in development or are coming soon. And so as Alpha is no longer going to be available in the new Adele platform, our focus for January is ensuring we have an equivalent ready. So we will be focusing on a learning plan for international level athletes and one also for national level athletes. I'll talk briefly now about our work in terms of ADO capability, and hopefully you've accessed and used some of our CISP resources, together with a lot of help from internal WADA colleagues and our regional offices. We have produced over 100 resources as part of CISP related to either the individual standard, the code, or the role that organizations play within the system. And the majority of those resources are again available in English, French, and Spanish. And the CISP team lives on, as does CISP. And so we will ensure we keep adding new content and new resources, tools, and templates as part of that program to help you with your day-to-day work. Our newest and possibly biggest project is our Global Learning and Development Framework. And this is where we're going to try and ensure that we have a robust global system to develop and train anti-doping practitioners. Together with the help of people in the community from across the globe, we are in the process of establishing some informal technical working groups. And these groups are going to help us develop some professional standards, competency frameworks, and importantly, training opportunities for key roles within the anti-doping system. Why are we doing this? Well, probably like me, you may have spent 2 years trying to learn all things anti-doping when you took up your job. This is a long time. And so one of the benefits of having training available is that we can try and shorten the learning curve that we all went through as part of our induction to the anti-doping world. We also want to ensure that people start off in the industry on the right path, and by having training available, supported by some professional development opportunities, we hope that people get familiar with their areas of work, the standards, the regulations, in a more effective way. And so we're going to run a pilot in Europe, just focused on 5 roles next year. And if that goes well, then we'll be looking to roll out those training programs globally from 2022, as well as look at some of the additional functional areas and develop the standards and training for that too. The training won't be mandatory, it's just an option for practitioners to access should they wish. And so that concludes our WADA update. I really hope yourselves, your colleagues, your families stay safe and well. And if we don't see each other virtually again, I hope that we can all try and enjoy the best Christmas that we can in spite of the COVID-19 pandemic, and look forward to hopefully a different world next year. Thank you very much.
Hello, and thank you very much. We are delighted to have join us today Amanda Hudson and Tony Cunningham, following on from their presentation, which was really helpful to get a sense of just how far the developments have occurred within the WADA education department. And I think I'd like to just start to both Tony and Amanda to ask that question of what have you noticed that has occurred through the development of a standalone education department? you know, the first time in WADA's history. That's a really exciting time. And what opportunities do you think that's now affording the team and therefore the wider sporting community?
Hi, Sue. Thanks, everyone. It's great to be here today. I hope you can all hear me. A few microphone malfunctions, but I mean, what a great question to start with. I never, ever imagined that, let's be honest, organizations would put, the money where their mouth is. So we've all experienced much talk about how important education is, but doing something about it is different. And I have to say, very proud of what WADA's done, and full credit to WADA to making some bold decisions. And what has that allowed us to do? Well, one, we have a far greater strategic presence, and I think that's something we can only continue to build on. And it's important that we all continue to help make education a common and vital function of any anti-doping program. So I think we're on the right journey there. And what's exciting is that, as we all know, when you have a good strategic position, you have the support of the organisation, then resources become available. And I know there was discussion yesterday about the need for more resources in this area. Now, education is cheap, but it still costs money to deliver. And so having a standalone department has done probably three core things. One, we now have recognition that we are an important part of the system. Two, it's enabled us to create a focus, and I hope our education agenda is clear and our core focus for now is also clear. And that has then led to number three, which is then aligning people and resources as well as work with the community to deliver on those core function areas that we believe we have. So this is the start. I mean, this is a really exciting time, a really positive time for education. And many of you will know I spent obviously a long time at UCAD. And I feel for a long time as a community, we've been sort of staring up at Mount Everest, wondering how on earth we're going to get there. And what's exciting for me right now is I feel we're getting everybody aligned. We've got a great community in the education sector, and I feel we've got the tools now to at least start the climb to base camp. And so that's exciting. We've got a whole industry of very passionate and committed people pulling together for the good of athletes and for the good of sport. And I'm excited about this journey together with you all to base camp, and then we can work out how we get to the peak.
Brilliant. Thanks, Amanda. I think that element around a journey is really important, isn't it? In terms of acknowledging that there's learning to be had, there are experiences to build on, and actually not everyone's got all of the answers on their own, and the value then of bringing in different views and perspectives that at times may differ from each other, but actually that's the value of a learning culture and a learning organisations then. And I think, Tony, if we can bring you in to reflect upon that journey that Amanda talked about in relation to a greater focus within the organisation around education. And obviously you've spoken about the social science research strategy and the value and clarity now of purpose around that moving forward. How do you see alliances like the Clean Sport Alliance and networks helping to really advance and deliver on that strategy moving forward?
Yeah, thanks, Sue. A great question, and great to be here with everyone today. I think Amanda covered it off very well in talking about the journey and what you just said, and I think it feels that way. And the great thing about being on a journey is that if you have people with you, it makes the journey all the better. And that's with the establishment of the education department in the last year, it kind of allows us for us to support the community better. But I think it allows the community to kind of feed into what we're doing. And there is a definite sense, especially with in the education sector, that we are all in this together. And when you look at networks then like the Clean Sport Alliance, that just kind of strengthens the community. It strengthens the relationships, like say downstream from where we're sitting. And it's great to see. And hopefully, as we continue forward, we'll be able to build those networks further, because one of the gaps we saw was this gap that we always see is between, if we're talking about research and we're talking about practice, is always that kind of inherent tension between the two. So when you see that the work that the Clean Sport Alliance is doing and other projects that we like to engage with, I think that it's very much a model of what we like to foster and nurture. And for us, it allows a kind of avenue for things to feed in where we can see, and it's directly impacted what we do then. For example, with the Delphi study, allow us to really identify key research priorities and make us feel that it is a good evidence-based approach then for what that is. So I think it's a positive thing all around.
And I think then building on that, if we just pull on one of the questions that has just come in through the Q&A, Laurie Patterson's asked, in the same vein as we do for testing through anti-doping rule violation reports, will WADA be creating an annual report that overviews the education landscape? So she's there said, do WADA plan to create some sort of publicly available information on what's happening globally in education? There's a call, I guess, from the community around that transparency and openness and sharing. Any plans from WADA's side around that at the moment?
I think that's a great question. Thanks, Laurie, for posting it. And I think it's fair to say that that would be one of our ambitions. Most people know me well enough that I'm very honest and always 2 steps away from being fired. But being completely honest, we collectively are not at a stage yet where we could actually publish something that would be of use and have meaning. Now, that's not to say we couldn't do a general report of the status quo, but Tony, together with some members from ADOs and wider in the community, and also the Social Science Review Panel, I know are looking at two key things that we think eventually could form an annual or biannual report of activity. I'll let Tony talk about the details, but 2 things, as I say, that we would hope would feed into that. The first is that we don't actually have a standard set of metrics right now across the education sector. We're all sort of trying to collect data, do some monitoring, and obviously with the compliance process that will come into effect in 2022, it allows us to try and streamline and harmonize the baseline data that we think we should be collecting. We don't know how many education sessions are being run. We don't know how many athletes are being reached. We don't know what topics people are being educated on. And I think it's broader than that, obviously, but there's some key examples. The second thing is, in our social science research strategy, we've been quite clear that social science research needs to be divorced from education and remarried to the wider anti-doping system. What I mean by that is social science research has typically just been seen as how do we make education programs better? And that's an important part, but it's not the only part. And Tony and I have a really strong desire to demonstrate how social science research can impact on the broader system. So if I had a Christmas list for Santa, I would like to think that in 10 years' time, we don't have an ADRV and a test report anymore. We actually have a what is the health of the clean sports system report, which would encompass all of the prevention model activities as outlined in the code and give everyone a sense of collectively how well the system is doing. So great question, Laurie. We're not there yet. Definitely an ambition. And I don't know if Tony wants to talk a little bit more about global metrics, which I see as being the first part of getting to that objective.
I think that covers it a lot, Amanda, but just a couple of points on, as you said, the global metrics. I think one of the challenges we have had in education and something that has hampered its development is that there hasn't been data readily available. Almost all the other areas of anti-doping generates standardized data by default because you know how many tests there are, you know how many positive cases, how many ADRVs. come out, whereas that's not the case in education, and it's very easy for it then to become invisible or difficult to measure effectiveness, which is something that's come up more in these sessions. So what we would look to do is that one of the requirements of the international standard is to start monitoring and evaluating the programs. So that means there's going to be a lot more data coming into the system, coming in through to WADA's databases. So what we look to do is to kind of start looking at that and start assessing what are areas that we can standardize the data collection on, or are there, to answer the question, I think we can examine then, are there ways that we can publish this and start comparing across the board how many athletes are getting educated, what type of activity is happening, how many people are in different education pools. Because I think one of the key things is with the international standard is collaboration. And part of that collaboration is going to be around visibility and seeing what other programs are doing and building on things that way. So I think that this will be a key area for us to look at. And as Amanda said, we'll have different projects that will hopefully help look at the overall health of the system with all of this data coming in. And we have a few different projects that are going to examine that. And that probably leads into the other question that I've seen on the screen there, Sue.
Yeah, so I mean, we could keep going, I think, for a whole day. It's fascinating to have the conversation and to learn around the development that we've already seen since the establishment of the bespoke and specific education department at WADA. Nicola Costa asked a question around WADA being able to provide guidance on monitoring and evaluation tools that NARDOs can implement. We're not going to be able to give that full kind of time today for you to respond to, but I think what we will provide further opportunities, I think, and I know WADA are doing further development opportunities with the anti-doping community to bring those questions to life. But really just to reinforce the message of what you mentioned earlier about being an enabler, and therefore how other members of the community can start to work with you in enabling some of those questions to be addressed in the future. So I think I just want to thank you both for taking the time to join us today from Canada. Time zones are not easy to manage, but we're really thrilled you've joined us and excited to hear the plans that you're putting in place to develop effective anti-doping education moving forward. So thank you both, and we look forward for the discussions moving forward.
Thank you, Sue. And for Nicola, check out the chapter in the guidelines, big chapter on monitoring and evaluation in the guidelines. But from snowy Canada, it is snowing. I wish you all a successful rest of the conference, and thanks for having us.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Sue.
Thank you. Hello and welcome back to the third and final session of our second CleanSport Insight Forum sessions today. I'm really delighted to be able to welcome our panelists to today's session. But before we do so, the background to Respect P is very much for us, the desire and passion to make sure that the work already undertaken by the CleanSport Alliance does not just stop at the end of the project. So through the Respect P, this is how we are ensuring the sustainability of the work already undertaken, but more critically, the involvement of para athletes and athlete support personnel. So building on what Tony and Amanda have shared in terms of their evolving strategy from WADA's perspective of being athlete-centered, of creating enabling environments and enabling networks, that's very much at the heart of Respect P. And as we transition from Respect through to Respect P, I'm delighted that Dr. Ian Bordley from the University of Birmingham will take over as the coordinator of Respect P. And therefore, it's a great pleasure for me to hand over to Ian for this session this afternoon and for him to provide a bit of context to Respect P and the panelists that we've got before us. Thanks, Ian.
Thanks. So yeah, I mean, I don't want to spend too much time talking about the next project because we've got this great panel with us this afternoon. So I'm keen to get on with the questions, but and the discussion with the panel. But yeah, the Respect P is really aiming to sort of build on a lot of the work that we did with the original Respect project. So and many of the things that we're aiming to do are similar to what we've done in the previous project, but now focusing specifically. Are we still live or? Okay.
What happened?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, sorry, not sure what happened there, but yeah, I was just, as I was just saying, you know, what we're aiming to do is just focus specifically on athlete support personnel and para athletes, and in terms of what we've done with Respect and developing a research agenda, doing reviews of the literature. They're two of the key things that we're aiming to do, and also engaging the athlete's voice, but the para athlete's voice, and also the voices of athlete support personnel through the Respect P project. So very much, you know, what we've done a model in terms of Respect P, but now transitioning the focus to para athletes and athlete support personnel, and that very much is in line with the panel discussion that we've got set up this afternoon in discussing the importance of research. Welcome, Michelle. See, Michelle's been able to join us now. That's great. So I'll move on now to some of the questions that we've got for the panel and start our discussions around this topic. So, you know, firstly, I want one of the first outputs coming from this project will be a review of the literature, and that's ongoing at the moment. And one of the things that we're seeing in that already is that there is a dearth in research literature around parasport. And Ali's not in because he's just starting his PhD around this topic, so he's doing a literature review at the moment, and that's something that he's acutely aware of. So one of the things that I want to ask to start with is, you know, why do we think that there's this gap in knowledge, specifically around clean sport research and parasports? And I think I'll probably put that one to the para athletes first. So Patrick, Ali, I don't know who wants to start, but what are your thoughts on this? Why have we got this gap in knowledge?
I think, from my point of view, looking at it, when you think about what has happened in terms of research for able-bodied communities and the ability of researchers to gather large numbers and gather large response sets in being a big number, it's much more difficult to do that with parasport, because generally we're training in smaller pods, we're training in smaller groups, so you have to reach out to more people. And like if you're coming to a place within Ireland, say, like if you're looking at para-canoeists within Ireland, it's n equals 1. You can't get a representative. Well, you can get a very representative sample, but it's not very statistically relevant. So I think that's a big issue for all of the research in the para area. We're much more spread out, and I think that's going to be an issue, I suspect.
Thanks, Patrick. That's a good point. Ali?
I think for me, parasport is still kind of quite young, and I guess it's not kind of the way it's accelerated means that research hasn't been able to keep up. And also, if you look at the resources that parasport has compared to able-bodied sport, there's still a lack of resources. And even though there's a desire there for more research, there needs to be more research, kind of resources kind of plugged in to make sure that, you know, parasport gets that sort of that recognition that it deserves. I think it, you know, the respect now it deserves means that it needs to, you know, have a lot more research pumped into it.
Thanks, Ali. Yeah, I think that first point from Patrick's a really interesting one in terms of sample sizes, because researchers are particularly quantitative researchers like large samples, so that could be, you know, one of the potential barriers that we'll need to try and think about and try and overcome when we're thinking about the research agenda in this area. And obviously the resources is one that we've talked about in the previous RESPECT project as well. So it's important that we see that upregulation of resources for this area as well. I don't know if Michelle, Mike, have you anything to add on that? Why you think there might be a gap in knowledge in this area, or do you think the points made by the athletes have covered everything?
I'd written 3 things down. I'd put population size, funding and resources, and the growth of the sports. So everything the guys covered, particularly with the population sizes. Whilst in my former life, when I was still in the military working at Headley Court, even in that sort of small sample where we had quite large numbers, in inverted commas, of para-athletes, getting them together, collating them, trying to communicate with them on a large scale was eminently difficult, even with that collective population. So on a wider scale, of course, it's harder. But I think my biggest point would have been more on the focus on para sport in the last 10 to 15 years has been growth and expansion of the participation. And then the focus on research has been a lot about classifications. So there's just less time, less resources then to move on. It feels like it's the next logical thing. I don't think it's something that's been missed. It's just, we needed to classify the athletes first to ensure a level playing field of competition. Obviously, this is the next step of level playing field.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, great points. Michelle, anything you wanted to add on this?
Well, it's really interesting that you're picking out one group of athletes, where I come from the Commonwealth Games family, where we've embraced para-athletes from the very start. And since Manchester 2002, athletes were just athletes. And I think sometimes if you create a problem, or create a select group, you are actually missing the fundamental fact that athletes are dealt with by the same anti-doping rules, and to section them in some way might actually miss great opportunities to actually understand what it is that all athletes face. And then certain athletes are finding certain challenges within the anti-doping framework to achieve what your ambition is in terms of clean sport. So I think it's important to recognise the whole context and not complicate this.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. They're great points there. I mean, you mentioned the Commonwealth Games there, and the fact that that's the one major games where para athletes or para competition and able body competition happen in the same major event at the same time, and that's one of the reasons why we've chosen that sort of our final forum, hopefully an in-person forum by 2022, will be centered around that time, because we're very keen to sort of bring these to amalgamate these areas, but so kind of aware that we might be in some ways sort of sectioning our athletes by focusing on this project. But I think it'll be important for us at the culmination of the project to bring all of this back together again and combine the findings from both of our projects. So yeah, really good points. So thanks for that, and welcome to Sophie, who's now been able to join us. So it's great to have Sophie on the panel as well. So we've got the full panel together now. So what I'll do is move on to the next question now, and then we'll maybe start with Sophie, so, as she's not had a chance to contribute to that first one. But do we think it's important to involve para-athletes and obviously athlete support personnel as well? I'll probably go to Mike for that one, in clean sport research, and if so, why is that important, and also how should we do that as well? So the different parts to this question.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, after all, the athletes are on the ground. We may see things differently to decision makers, which is why I think it's so key to have open discussions with all stakeholders in the form of advisory groups, to have an athlete rep, asking other athletes their opinions.
Thanks, Sophie. Ali, Patrick, anything from an athlete perspective you want to add?
I think for me, if you look at the Paralympic Games in clean sport, I think when it comes to, well, in my opinion, substance doping and the anti-doping rule violations, they're actually quite low compared to the Olympic side. And I think the biggest threat to Paralympic sport is probably classification and boosting. And I think there's hardly any research there to, well, for me, the trend in Paralympic sport is them two practices that needs to be addressed more. And you can probably argue that, you know, the lack of testing means that there probably is a lack of anti-doping rule violations. But at the moment, classification and boosting seem to be quite a big topic in parasport. And I think research needs to be kind of driven to that first to really protect athletes.
Would you also say, Ali, that the fact that some para-athletes have athlete support personnel who are directly involved in their performance, like guide runners, there's a need to make sure that there's a wider sort of collection of information. I mean, we should be testing our guide runners as much as we are testing our athletes, and that's something that's missing from the para movement.
Well, yeah, I think if you look at if you do the guide runner, they're actually an extension of yourself as well. Mm-hmm. So actually, you know, a guide runner could potentially be doing something that they're not supposed to, but doesn't get tested because they're not the athlete. So I think that's probably a very good point, actually, because
Sophie's horse is tested, so why not?
Well, yeah, exactly. So I think for me, from that perspective, whoever competes needs to be available for testing, no matter what.
Yeah, and maybe this about who's on the field of play. I feel like everyone classified as on the field of play should be tested.
I think as well, maybe there is another element of this in terms of the relationship between athletes and athlete support personnel in some of the sports is quite different to what it would be in an able-bodied sport. So for my own sport, say in para-canoeing, not so much for me. I'm able to pick up, carry my boat, get on, train myself. But for people with higher levels of disability, they will always have to have a trainer there to get them on, get them off the water. And I think there is what I would like to see a body of research on the potential influence, extra influence that athletes support personnel can have on para-athletes in those sort of situations. And it is something, obviously, that, you know, athlete support personnel leading people in the wrong direction is something that's very, very serious and needs to be looked at. So that would be something that I would kind of highlight.
I'll probably go across to Mike at that point, because of that mention of athlete support personnel. What are your thoughts on that in terms of?
Yeah, I agree completely with that. You know, any athlete in any sport at any level with athlete support personnel has this unique relationship. And from the positive side, if we're looking at driving research forward and education forward, then the inclusion of those personnel not only ensure all the things that have been previously mentioned, which are more the negative side, but on the positive side, there's this united front we're trying to drive towards the right place, where we're all sort of sharing that common goal of what we're trying to achieve with clean sport. Mm-hmm. So it's not that the athletes stand alone with the athlete personnel behind them, the support personnel. It's all this team effort. So it needs a team and a sort of community approach to this plan.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. And in terms of, if we're going to actively involve athletes and athlete support personnel in the research process and in research, how's the best way of going about that? Probably go to the athletes first with that one. So, Ali?
I think from my point of view, I think a lot of athletes at the moment, they lack confidence in the system to even partake in research, because obviously there's a need for it and we do want research to happen, but it seems that a lot of the research is always based on the Olympic sports and able-bodied when it comes to clean sport. And I think if the power of voice was increased within anti-doping in general, then you definitely can get a lot of para athletes on board. But from the research that I've seen, you've hardly got any para athletes in that participant research. So I think there's a lot of ways that the system can actually involve para-athletes.
Thanks, Ali. Patrick, Sophie, anything to add on that?
I think that, you know, I suppose, again, I'm coming from a country with a small number, and it is trying to gather people together. It's trying not to be delivering this to one person at a time. I know, like, in the run up to Rio, we had a series of one-day meetings where all of the potential athletes that were scheduled to go to the games or possibly going to the games were present, and we did anti-doping education at those, and I think that's the way to get it to a broader group if you can at all. The other thing is trying to identify and anti-doping agencies trying to identify champions within the para community. Like, there are people out there who are quite vocal within each sport, and just to try and get them as a visible face, just to try and say this is a resource that's out there. You know, you need to educate yourself, and to start trying to get them to, I suppose, try and get the governing bodies to get on board from there. I think that's how I would approach.
Thanks, Patrick. Sophie?
Yeah, I think for me, we need to look at how we engage with athletes. So that goes both in terms of research and education. You know, athletes aren't going to fill out a whole long survey if they're asked to. So how can we, you know, really engaging athletes with athletes so that they partake? You know, I mentioned education. A webinar is really the best way of educating athletes. If I think to my job, you know, we have education on, like, compliance to do with investment banking, and I think, you know, they're really good that they bring up the relevant information that we need to know, and at the end there's a relatively easy test highlighting, you know, what the athlete should know. So looking, you know, at the corporate way of educating people, I think is the way to go.
Thanks, Sophie. That's great. No, I think some really good points there around, you know, raising the athlete's voice and engagement. And just to sort of move across onto looking at athlete support personnel as well, Michelle and then Mike, you know, what are your thoughts on best ways of engaging athlete support personnel in clean sport research?
I think Sophie raises a really pertinent point, and that is, what value does the athlete really see directly from engaging in research? And we must see that a lot when, you know, you've purchased something and then you get a feedback and you think, do I really want to give feedback? You might give feedback if it's negative. And one of the problems we've got with researching in this area is that athletes spend a lot of their time answering people's questions, but they rarely see a direct outcome from it in terms of change. And I think that is when there's going to be a problem in engaging lots and lots of researchers in this space, and suddenly we've overwhelmed our athletes and they're just beginning to think, well, actually, where's something changing for me? And I do think it's really a challenge for the researchers to be able to see change happen, not just papers. Athletes don't see the papers you go and give at conferences. What they want to see is changes to the impact on their lives in terms of what anti-doping is really doing for them. And to be perfectly honest, in all the years that I've been involved, very rarely have I seen change. I mean, I advocated for education 2 decades ago, and, you know, just to see now, you know, we're just getting there. It's like, wake up, world. So I think it's a real challenge for researchers.
Thanks, Michelle. And Mike, any thoughts from you on engaging athlete support personnel and athletes in research?
I think when it's trying to engage them into research, a lot. It's two things I would try to look at. The first thing is the so what. It's what Michelle alluded to. It's the so what for me to be involved with this. What's the outcome of it? And that's the tangible thing that comes as a result. But then it's the dissemination of that information too. It's not just publishing research. It's breaking it down into understandable layman's translation, so that the public, the macro to micro level of people involved go, okay, I get why we did that research, and here's what it's worth. And that starts off as a little trickle, but then it becomes a waterfall as that becomes more clear, because the researchers know how to pitch what they're trying to do. But once you start getting success, then people will be running towards the researchers to be involved.
That's right. That'd be a nice problem to have, wouldn't it? But I think there's as I mentioned earlier, some of the aims of this current project and the work packages involve some focus groups with athletes and athlete support personnel. I think very much some of the issues that we're seeing discussed here are the ones that are going to be raised, but it'd be really interesting to sort of try and use that as a catalyst for engagement of athletes as well. But also, I talked about when I was discussing with Eric earlier about the current research agenda, is that importance of engaging athletes throughout the research process, not just as participants, but as active contributors, and athletes and athlete support personnel. So your participants are involved when you're designing the research and right through until you disseminate it. And that can, I think that will really help us with the engagement and also the translation, some of the things that we've talked about there. So we'll certainly be hoping to try and do our bit there in terms of sort of taking that co-creation approach with this. And I think just staying on the subject of sort of communication, but changing tack slightly, I wanted to ask around about communicating information online. So obviously we've seen over the last year the importance of communicating information online. And also Eric spoke earlier about the knowledge exchange platform, which we'll be using again here for the findings coming out of this project. And I'm going to go to Mike first here, because I know you've done a lot of work in the last year, sort of as a sort of practitioner who's used to working a lot with the hands and sort of finding new ways of sort of engaging in your craft, but through online means, which is no easy task as a physiotherapist. So, what do you think are some of the best ways we could communicate and disseminate knowledge online?
I think the actual ways, the tangible ways themselves can vary. I think the approach is the key thing. It's about being brave and inventive, and being prepared to break from tradition. In research, we're very good at just posting research and not finding ways to make it more appealing to people to be interested in finding out about it, but be understanding it. So a lot of the times, as personally, if I'm trying to digest and translate research to athletes, for example, then I have to put an athlete's mind to it of what does this mean to them when they read it? What are they going to take away from it? Now, there's obviously different. Sometimes then I'll take the same piece of research, but I'll disseminate it in different ways, targeted for the different populations it's aimed at. So it's more about being, I think online and social media particularly is probably a really valid format for us to do that. But I think it's about being brave, inventive, and trying new things to get that bridge to the population we're trying to reach.
Thanks, Mike. And I'll go to sort of Michelle with that question as well, because I know a lot of the work you do around sport integrity, you engage a lot online as well. So anything that you wanted to add?
Well, yes, we do engage a lot online, but the important thing is then, athletes, they ply their trade on the field of play. And so the importance is how they translate it from the virtual environment into the environment where they actually are watching other athletes, interfacing with other athletes in competitive training situations, in order that they can realize the research in practice, because we are in danger of just living a virtual world that is not really how athletes are actually playing their sports. So I think it's got to go a step further. It's convenient, it's easy for the most part of the world, And yes, the recognition that not every part of the world, we have that a lot within the Commonwealth in terms of people who will not have access to the internet on such a regular basis. And how do we then create something that they can go and use offline and still be able to come and feed back on it? I think those are all very important challenges.
Thanks, Michelle. They're great points. And to the athletes, anything that you would like to see in terms of the way findings and important information is communicated to you?
I think that the way that things are communicated, it is important, but to a certain extent, it's less important than what's being communicated. If athletes see that it's making a difference, and the points that Michelle's making are very valid, if athletes see that it's making a difference, athletes will embrace it. So if an athlete sees, weird anti-doping decisions coming out, and it just fading into the background, rather than a situation where at least the anti-doping organization acknowledges that this is the outcome according to the laws that we have now, but it may not be what we want in the future, so we're going to have to change things up. So I think it needs to be much more open, and I think that's one of the things that this project could do, would encourage more openness from all of the anti-doping agencies, so that they can say, look, this is where our policy is. We know that it's not perfect, but what steps do you want to take? And I think if athletes could see that they had a voice and that voice had some influence, it would make a huge difference to people's engagement with the training and the education then, because people would want to know what's going on.
Thanks, Patrick. No, I think we've seen definitely over the last 2 or 3 years a real change in the amount the athlete voice is heard. But I think the next step is to see how that's actually influencing policy and seeing change there, isn't it? And once they start to see that, then I think we'll see far more engagement and happier athletes. Ali?
I think for me, the anti-doping system seems to, not utilise the knowledge of athletes on the ground when it comes to policy making. And for me, it's how you communicate that clearly and simply, because the anti-doping kind of system is complicated. It is. Just look at the code and substances, just little things like that. But also as well, I want the anti-doping system to actually admit fault sometimes and go, you know what? We demand strict liability of you. This is now us. We've made a mistake. We're sorry. This is how we're going to fix it. We never see that. We never see them admit to mistakes. But we, as athletes, we are upheld to the highest of standards, where the system itself isn't. And I think that's where athletes struggle to have confidence in the system that they are protected, to the highest standards.
Thanks, Ali. I'm just seeing that we've got 1 or 2 questions coming in from the audience as well, so I'm just going to move across to one or two of those. I've got a really interesting one, just someone picking up on what Patrick has said about the dynamic between athlete and athlete support personnel, and potentially that power dynamic being different within parasport compared to able-bodied sport. I mean, is that something that we see as being particularly relevant here? Don't know, Sophie, if you want to comment first there.
Yeah, I think in my sport, they very much leave it up to the athlete to sign their athlete support personnel up to education. Now, I'm quite studious, and I absolutely make sure my coach and my carer signs up to the education, but I wonder what other athletes with carers who, my carer helps me all the time, makes me meals, she needs to be aware of anti-doping education, but it has been left up to me to make sure of that. What I do think it should be the athlete's responsibility. I'm just thinking of younger athletes. Do we educate parents? Yeah.
Thanks, Sophie. Patrick, anything you wanted to add on that?
No, I mean, I just think, I'm not sure, it's not relevant to everyone, as I say, but I think and I'm sure there are able-bodied athletes who have very strong relationships with their support personnel as well. But I suppose there is an additional factor, because there could be other people, a bit like Sophie is saying. There could be, as well as a coach, there could be somebody who's helping out with, a physical help in terms of moving boats or moving horses or whatever, that wouldn't be in the normal picture. And they need to be educated. The athlete and the coach and whoever else is involved need to be as one. And as Mike said earlier on, I think it can be a really positive voice, because then you get 3 chances to get the positive message through. And if 2 of the 3 voices are making the positive, then that's the way things will go. So it is an additional advantage, but there's a risk there as well.
Thanks, Patrick. And if I go across to Mike and then Michelle, just from the perspective of the athlete support personnel, is that something that you've considered, or you see being important here in terms of this dynamic?
Yeah, I think, again, what I don't want to do is play down the relationship between athletes that aren't para-athletes, because we know how crucial they are as well. But as Patrick and Sophie have said, there is that unique thing sometimes in the para world. But I absolutely concur with everything Sophie said and Patrick about the team approach, where the more voices that are singing from this same song sheet and passing that same message, because they'll pass it at different levels. The athlete support worker might go and tell their professional colleagues. They might go and tell their family and friends. The athlete will work in athlete circles. So that same message is being, interpreted different ways by different people, but on the same wavelength, but then just getting disseminated to all these different sort of spider's web that reaches out from that. And I think it's a really powerful tool that we can access. And they're just, the athlete support personnel are just one part of that. There's nothing special about us, but we are someone where there's something there that we can do to help that message get across.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, no, I think it's making sure that all the cogs in the are turning in the right direction, isn't it? Michelle, anything you wanted to?
Well, yeah, I mean, just really to reiterate, competence in terms of the promotion of clean sport and fair sport, is just as important as safeguarding for athlete welfare. So if we do emphasize, as we know, research has shown us that emphasizing the moral side of sport, the responsibility and the importance of sport being fair, that's something you can get that team effort too. And it would be really important to change from what seems to be driving at the moment anti-doping education, which is education is done to you, and to pick up on what everybody's saying here, actually make us all part of being able to move the agenda forward. And actually education's a reciprocal thing. I mean, that's certainly how I've always felt about education. I learn as much from my students as I hope my students do from me. So it really is that reciprocation that needs to go on. And if we are going to enter a new era under an international standard, which is top down, I'm afraid you're going to lose the world of sport. You're going to lose the athletes, because they've got a voice and it needs to be heard.
Thanks, Michelle. No, and I think that final point there is is a good example of one of the things that you said in one of your earlier comments, was that there's a lot of commonality across parasport and non-disabled sport in terms of clean sport. And I think it'll be important towards the end of this project in bringing those together, as I said earlier. But I think what we've also seen through some of the responses there are some unique elements, like Ali mentioned, in terms of sort of boosting and classification fraud, which are unique elements to parasport as well that need much more research attention. And also some of the things we've just discussed there in terms of that dynamic between athlete support personnel and the athletes. Some of the ones that are unique to parasport, but there are also ones that are relevant across sport as well. So some really good points there, I think, for us to take on board as a research team, I think. But just being aware of the time, and I realise we're not at the end of the session yet, but I want to there's one question I want to put to everyone before we finish discussions. here, and this is, what would be your number one question to be added to a clean sport research agenda specifically focused on parasports or athlete support personnel? So this is one of the aims of this Respect P project, is to develop a research agenda in this area. So we'd be really interested to get your thoughts on what your number one question would be. I suspect I know what Ali's might be, but we'll find out if I'm right or not. But I'll go around my screen as I see people. So I'll start with Patrick.
I think one of the things that would be interesting to get an idea of, I'm conscious that in parasport there are essentially, you can break parasport down in many ways, but one of the ways you can break it is acquired injuries or born with injuries, or people who got them as very young ages or not. I think it would be interesting to get some feel for what people's attitude is to things like medication, TUEs, etc., as a comparison with for maybe disabilities that do need that, as compared with the able-bodied athlete community. I think because there, we do have there is a potential that we do have a very different relationship with our body and with what our body can do, and a slightly different way of viewing and respecting of what we can attain with it. So I wonder whether that would come out with a slightly different view of boosting either medically or in terms of classification. There's something there. I'm not sure exactly how to phrase it, but that's something.
Yeah, no, good points. Thanks, Patrick. Mike, your thought would be your number one.
I'm going to cheat. I'm going to go for two. That was tied number one. I couldn't pick one. The selfish bit of me, the therapist in me, really wants to see some sort of analysis into sort of injury recovery. Going along the lines of what Patrick said, para athletes do have a really different relationship with their bodies. And in my experience working with para athletes, and sometimes you see the way they handle injury is different, but I'd love to have a bit more quantitative stuff behind it to show what is that in numbers. How is their recovery from injury compared to, maybe a para javelin thrower compared to an able-bodied javelin thrower? Is there a difference in a shoulder injury recovery? Is there attitudes and beliefs and behaviours that play a different part in that athlete recovery? But I think from a wider scale, from a more strategic thing, I think the thing I'd always like to know more is just who are the people that we should be engaging in the research? What's the target audience? Who are the stakeholders that we should have in this research on that sort of most top-down, or almost let's work out what the cart is and then put the horse in front of it instead of the other way around. So let's just understand where we're trying to take this stuff and who we're taking it to.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, I think that alludes back to some of the things we've talked about in terms of the importance of engaging all stakeholders, and we need to know those are from the outset. Ali?
I think mine's twofold. So I think the big one for me is whether or not the current definition of doping itself should be redefined to factor in other forms of cheating, to make it more Paralympic flexible, because at the moment it only focuses on substances and methods. And we know in parasport there are two trends that are not in the code at the moment. If they can't do that, then should it be part of integrity instead? Should anti-doping be integrity and then have different facets like max fixing, corruption, classification in that organisation? So they're two big questions I'll probably ask for the system at the moment.
Thanks, Ali. Yeah, there are some pretty big questions, I think, Ali, that are important to answer. Michelle?
Yeah, I think Ali raises some very good issues there, because maybe the broader definition in terms of classification, maybe even gender, might be coming up before long. But I think I'd probably go to a very sort of simple question, because I like to keep things a little bit simple. What do athletes really understand by clean sport? I'm not sure that that's got any meaning. You throw that term about, and I don't know that it's got any meaning when you see around the world how some athletes get more money than others, some get more privileges than others. And, I come back to those athletes who've had to actually purchase their own kit to go to games, pay their own fares to go to games. And I think, it's important to really understand what we mean by clean sport, because I don't think there's one definition there.
Thanks, Michelle. No, I think that's a really important point. It's a question we've tried to contribute to with the original Respect project, and one we're still continuing to try and contribute to. But certainly one of the things that came out of that original project was that there's multiple interpretations and definitions of clean sport, and some people seem to use the term for their own advantage almost. So I think it's very important that we start to narrow that definition down so we know what we mean by it. Sophie?
Yeah, for me, as I've just said, I'd like to see how we can, use anti-doping regulations, how they can be applied to classification, because anti-doping is an Olympic issue, it's got a lot of funding, whereas classification is miles behind. And I'm going to go out there and say, if you're going to cheat in para sport, you'd be more likely to get away with it in classification than anti-doping.
Yeah, no, they're great points, Sophie. Thanks for that. And I think there's been some great questions there and great discussion throughout the panel. And lots of, it's always a good panel when you're left with more questions than you started with. And it's left us with many questions, I think, for our project to try and answer, or at least contribute to answering. So, thanks to everyone. I realise on time we're getting close to the end of the day here and the end of this panel, but I just want to finish this particular session by saying thanks to all the panel members, and I'm glad we managed to get past the technical issues and get everyone on the panel in the end, which is great because there's some fascinating discussion between everyone. So thanks for your contributions. And in terms of the day as a whole, just to wrap things up now, I just want to thank the audience for their contributions and participation, and hope those that haven't been able to attend live will be able to watch the recordings, and also for anyone that's not had a chance to get on the Knowledge Exchange platform and see the other resources that are on there and the videos that were uploaded, to take a look at those. Our project will now obviously carry on and try to answer some of those questions that we've discussed today, and we'll look forward to disseminating the findings from them. So we've got future forums planned. I mentioned the one that's in 2022 in Birmingham. There is one that was planned in Munster for 2021. I'm not sure whether that will go ahead or will be later rescheduled, but we'll see. We're all at the whim of the pandemic, I think, at the moment, aren't we? So we'll wait and see. But I hope everyone's enjoyed this online forum at least. The newsletters that we've been putting out on a weekly basis will continue, but they'll be moving to a quarterly basis, so that every 2 or 3 months you'll get a newsletter if you're signed up for those, and we'll inform you of the updates coming out of the Respect P project. And I hope to see everyone at future forums. We'll be there online or hopefully in person. And just thanks to everyone for their contributions.
Thank you.
Thank you.